Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Taipology. As always, I'm your host, Angelica coming to you from Taipei. And today we have our first returning guest ever, Anusar Farooqi, a finance professional from New York City, financial capital of the world. Hello, Anusar.
Hi, Angelica.
And I bet you've been very busy lately.
Thank you for having me again. It was great last time, and I hope this conversation was also useful to people.
Well, on this show, we don't do clickbait, but I am going to title this show America's Strategic Defeat, not because I'm being controversial, but you wrote a post with this title a week ago. And as far as I'm concerned, everything that you put out there has been panning out to a frightening degree. So tell me, Anusar, this whole war started on February 28th. When did you have a feeling that this was going to be terrible for America?
So, it was before the war that I wrote another piece called The Logic of Escalation in the Middle East. And what I argued there, which obtained on the first day of the war, and I was the only analyst, I think, to predict that, which was that because the American campaign is going to be so devastating for Iran, and the main objective of the American campaign was to disarm Iran, to disable, take out all its missile launchers, missiles, drones, drone production sites, missile production sites, the entire supply chain of Iran's ability to attack its neighbors and Israel and American bases and so on, would be immediately attacked as a priority target. So the agenda seems to be that we're going to go after the regime's leadership, we're going to take Khamenei, we're going to kill the IRGC leadership, we're going to kill the military leadership and the intelligence community and so on in Iran and kind of decapitate it. That was one theory of victory that they were pursuing. This is what Bibi convinced Trump would work. Now this is, let me put this in terms of like theories about air power. I think that's a useful way of framing this. So there are three major theories of air power. One is that you take out the enemy leadership and destroy the regime. This is a very novel new idea, first proposed by John Warden in the early 90s, 1990, 1981, for the campaign against Saddam Hussein. It was tried, it failed. It is tried again now, and it has failed. There is no known instance of decapitation strike affecting regime change or even compelling obedience by a regime in history. The other the other theory of air power is that you can punish the enemy so much from the air that you can compel political obedience. They will cry uncle and you twist their arm enough and you deliver enough pain. So this is the Schelling's theory of the power to hurt. That if you just deliver enough pain from the air, bombard their infrastructure, bombard their population centers, bombard their industry, water systems, electricity production, blah, 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 everything that keeps modern societies functioning, if you just hit them hard enough, they will cry uncle and they will obey you. This guided the strategic bombing campaigns of the Second World War. This guided the campaigns against North Vietnam. If you remember Rolling Thunder, this is the most studied application of this theory. Schelling himself advised the government on it. He is the one who designed that policy. That policy completely, absolutely failed. The reason is that nation states are not humans. If you torture a human being, they will definitely cry uncle at some point, right? And so it sounds reasonable that if you deliver enough pain, you can compel obedience. But in fact, nation states are not human beings. You can't torture them in the same way. They don't have the same kind of. It's not easy for a state to say we give up here. We're giving up raising our hands.
If anything, there seems to be something of a rally around the flag effect. I've seen amazing videos coming out of Tehran where people were chanting in the square pro-regime slogans. And there's literally bombs going off in the background. You can hear it making a terrible clatter. And in response, the people just chant louder. Absolutely astonishing.
Right, and this is something that is one of the central predictions of the great sort of theorist and student of air coercion, which is Robert Pape. Pape's book Bombing to Win is still taught in American air academies and so on. Like this is a very, very serious work, the monograph on the subject, and he shows that no bombing campaign, no punishment campaign has ever compelled a population to turn on its state. The response is always the opposite, which is that they are under such great threat that it's time to join hands and close ranks and resist the foreign enemy at all costs, even at devastating costs. And so this is one of the central positions, and it was predicted in advance, and it has borne out. This is just not an option. There is no point. There is no possibility of a regime change because people are rising up because they are mad at bombs getting dropped on them.
So there are two theories of regime change through the air we've debunked. You can't just decapitate and hope that the whole regime falls over. You can't inflict so much pain that the populace rises up and demand a regime change. What's the third theory of regime change through the air?
Before I come to the third theory, because that's related to the entire essay I wrote and the whole argument about why strategic defeat is inevitable. Before we come to that, can I make a subtle refinement of the point? It's not so much that decapitation is an impossible strategy. It depends on the regime's structure. If a regime is completely built around one man, a dictatorship where every node of power ends up at one place, and if you destroy this nut from the middle out, right, there is a serious possibility of causing a collapse of the regime and a replacement by another military junta that is not of the same, that not from the same political vision or whatever, right? And so there is, if you take out Saddam Hussein and his entire central coercive apparatus in Iraq in 1990s, that was a real possibility of a completely different kind of regime. This is a highly institutionalized regime. This is not of that type. It's like saying you can take out Donald Trump and change the Republican Party. That's not going to happen, right? And so it depends very significantly on the fact that Iran is not a dictatorship of the Strongman type, the Arab Strongman type. It's a highly institutionalized vanguard revolutionary regime. People call it theocracy, but a theocratic aspect is one aspect of it. It's also a republic. It's also like an interesting civil military system where the IRGC has a lot of influence, but it is not decisive on every matter. It's a complex, highly complex, institutionalized, very, very developed state formation and a very institutionalized state formation. It's very hard to gut it. It's very, very hard to say you can take out this coterie of top officials and it's going to collapse. That's just not going to happen yet.
Also, to me, it's just the Ayatollah was 86 years old when we took him out. Didn't we think that there will be a succession plan in place already? And we've taken out IRGC leadership before, and it's had very little effect. So it seems to me like the definition of insanity, as it is always, is doing the same thing over and over again and hope that it works. So okay, hit me with the third theory. What else is there?
So the third theory is the official Air Force theory, which is that the way to disarm an enemy and the way to degrade and destroy the enemy's ability to wage war is to interdict all the sinews of war, is to destroy the pin factory that you really need to make this work. Yeah, that you destroy that aluminum factory or that particular phosphate plant or whatever. There are nodes. The system depends on some key nodes, and if you take out those key nodes and attack them, the enemy's ability to wage war is significantly degraded and reduced. And this is called the interdiction theory of air power, right? And this has been sort of the one. So of course the third theory is air power as a support for ground forces, which is not a strategic theory, not a theory of strategic air war. It's a theory of air support for ground combat. That's a completely different thing. That's a combined arms theory.
This, I would say, sounds at least a little bit more likely.
Yes, so there is a reason why all the militaries in the world have always considered the real purpose of strategic bombing to do this deep interdiction, right? Where you are not only fighting the tanks in the front and the infantry in the front or whatever, you are going behind enemy lines and attacking the pipeline through which the enemy is generating weapons and deploying them in the front line.
And more than that, isn't it? Because throughout this war, I've heard a lot, since before the war even started, that Iran's ability to set off missiles could be degraded by taking out the missile launchers. So does that also belong to that third theory of
It's exactly
interdiction
that.
through air power?
So let's think about Iran's military options here, right? Iran is one of the world's great drone and missile powers. It has the largest and most diverse stockpile of missiles in the Middle East by a margin. It has a very, very large drone production capability. And it has the ability to reproduce these things over time and has mastered them for decades and decades. So they field hypersonic missiles that the United States has not mastered yet. This is a very serious missile power, right? And what the big threat posed by Iran in terms of fighting back. So if this is going to be, as the New York Times assumed, a one-sided war of punishment, right? That's a completely different ballgame. If they're going to retaliate and they're going to attack targets in Israel and Gulf and U.S. bases and so on, and close Hormuz above all, that's a very different war, right? And that war you might lose. So the issue is, what is the rate at which the United States can disarm Iran's missile and drone capabilities and its ability to attack its neighbors and keep the Strait of Hormuz closed and so on, and attack U.S. bases, attack Israeli cities, hold the entire thing at all assets and all U.S. interests in the region at risk, right? Constantly. What is the timeline on which the United States can degrade Iran's capabilities to continue these attacks? That is the key decisive question.
I know you're asking a rhetorical question, but what I've heard is that they have several hundred missile launchers. And if we can get them all, no more missiles. Is that true? Because I don't know if it is.
So you have to understand that the military's pronouncements have to be taken with a pinch of salt. And what we've seen is that the numbers have gone back and back and back on their numbers. Until about 2 days ago, the Pentagon was saying we've got 90% of Iranian missiles and drone capabilities, and that's what Trump announced in his big speech, right? Today, the Bloomberg reported that the Pentagon is saying that we have only taken out 50% of them.
Interesting.
And on top of that, the initial estimates may be completely off by a whole order of magnitude.
Wow, it's a miracle. It's a 12th day of war. On the 12th day of the war, the missile launchers came back to life.
Yeah. I mean, but the thing is that some of this may be propaganda, some of this may be a kind of just actual honest mistakes, assessment mistakes. The issue is that nobody really truly knows the scale of these things. What we know is the magnitude, the order of magnitude here. So certainly the Iranians have more than 1,000 missiles left in their arsenal, no doubt. Even the Israeli intelligence says they started off with 2,500. They fired 600 so far of these long-range missiles that can attack Israel. And there is no reason to believe that their capability of using these missiles has gone down, despite many claims to the contrary and so on. They have persistently kept up the pace of attacks. And now they've changed their strategy. Initially, the strategy was boom, we're going to attack everything, right? That was the first day. And then they're like, okay, they pared back and they settled into a much more sustainable attack, targeting strategy. So now they are holding the really dramatic developments that has happened is not just so. Actually, let me step back and tell you the thesis first, so that people have an idea of what we are talking about in a general sense. The big thesis is this: if you take this interdiction campaign as the central feature of what the United States must do to avoid defeat, right? The first thing it has to do, it has to quickly subdue Iran's ability to shut down Hormuz and to keep attacking its neighbors and to basically shut down business and the economy in the Gulf, right? Oil production, gas production, blah, blah, blah. So unless the United States can do that in a short amount of time, it's obvious that would be a massive strategic defeat for the United States. If 6 months from now, the United States has still not reopened Hormuz, and Iran is still striking targets in the UAE and Israel, and US bases are still closed and not been repaired, and US forces are still far away, that would be a massive strategic defeat. It would destroy the Trump presidency, it would destroy the GOP, the world economy would crater, that we would have a real global recession, right? So Iran can impose considerable costs if it can do that. So it's a very, very decisive question. The decisive question is not whether the United States can get a strategic victory or not, it's whether the United States can avoid strategic victory. I don't know what a strategic victory would look like, but I know that the United States will face strategic defeat if it is not able to reopen the Gulf for business.
I'm reading your post from yesterday. I assume conservatively that Iran had a stockpile of 20,000 drones when it was attacked. It could be higher, maybe even by multiples, but I think 200,000 is beyond the probable upper bound of initial inventory. I show that even in the highly implausible extreme scenario where Iran cannot reconstitute any production sites and the US degrades them at the rate of 90% a month, Iran can still sustain a high rate of fire for 4 months. Now, I bring up this post because I like what you're doing here. You're getting quantitative. And you're saying, okay, let's imagine the worst case scenario for Iran. In 4 months, they can still fire off drones. Let's not even talk about the missiles. And is it true that as long as they can keep firing off those drones, they can keep closing the strait?
Yeah. They can keep closing the strait. They can keep holding oil assets, oil infrastructure at risk. They can keep holding US bases at risk, Israeli cities at risk. This war is not over until they stop or until we make them stop. So if we can't make them stop for a long time, that would be a strategic defeat is my basic point. And then the math comes in, and the math is actually very straightforward. This is not a complicated equation. The equation is very simple. Iran has a certain stockpile of missiles and drones, whatever. It has a certain amount of, it's expending a certain amount. Some of them are getting destroyed by US-Israeli attacks. But the important thing is not the stockpiles themselves, not the inventories themselves, but how quickly they can replenish the inventories and how quickly the US can interdict the supply chains of these missiles and drones being produced. So what really matters is whether the United States can take out the production sites of the drones and missiles. And the problem there is that these drones, the Shahid drones, 136, they're really, really cheap and like they can be made in a basement.
It's like $20K, right?
Yeah, it's $20,000, and like they are so cheap and they are so easy to put together, and the blueprints are so easily available, and the amount of technical know-how in the Iranian society is so deep that there is no reason to believe that the number of production sites that Iran can create for these drones is in the thousands, or certainly in the high hundreds. And this is something that is extremely hidden and very, very hard to detect by surveillance. So we have the United States and Israel have complete geospatial surveillance, very high definition military grade, of course, right? So they can track everything. So anything that they can detect and recognize, oh look, that's a missile, they can take out, right? They can at least hope to take out in time before it's launched. But things that are hidden, like the production sites of the drones, that campaign is a very, very difficult campaign. It's not a trivial campaign. So that complicates the problem, which means that the core equation here, which is that the rate at which you can destroy their ability to make these weapons, and the rate at which they can reconstitute these production sites to make the same weapons, that D minus R, that's the governing factor here. That determines how long they can sustain the rate of fire, and that determines what the rate of fire they can sustain, that determines the time to exhaustion, that determines the trajectory of the inventories over time. And so if you just do this math straight up, and you can do a kind of scenario analysis, and what I found was that in the normal scenarios, in the sort of reasonable parameter values, like for example, the United States can take out 75, in my baseline scenario, the United States can take out 75% of all production sites in any given month. Iran can reconstitute 25%, no more. Okay, so I'm bending over backward even in the baseline scenario. In that baseline scenario, Iran can sustain 3,000 weapons launched, 3,000 drones launched per month for more than 36 months.
Wow.
Yeah. If we assume that the rate of destruction is 90%, and Iran can repair not a single production site, okay, completely heroic, absurd assumption. Even then, it takes Iranian drone strikes don't fall below 100 a day until 4 months, 5 months from now.
I'm just wondering at this point, we've gone through all the three theories of war from the air. So decapitation doesn't work. The populace are not going to magically rise up.
More importantly, decapitation has already been died and it has not worked.
Yeah, and third of all, you can't bomb the ability to make war out of existence at the rate that's fast enough. So my question is, okay, did they not see this coming? That you're literally talking about very well-known theories of war that's taught.
Central theories, absolutely central. Any serious military analyst, any serious air power analyst, student will tell you that these are the central theories of air power. And this is this is also a very standard model. Anybody can do this. People at RAND are doing this. People at the Air Force are doing this. The Pentagon is doing this. They know the model I'm working with. They know they have exactly the same model. They know this is not going to work. Now, what they didn't realize before they went into war, that Iran would actually dare to do what it is doing. They were surprised by Iran's willingness to escalate.
Yeah, Iran escalated very quickly, especially to the Gulf allies that signaled neutrality. They signaled, we don't want any part of this. Where it's America and Israel, return to sender, don't touch us. But they were like taken out first.
Yeah. So part of the reason is that there are U.S. military bases, and Iran has systematically attacked U.S. military bases in the region. This is another one of those confounding factors, right? Which is that they did not reckon that, in fact, we know that they didn't reckon that this would happen because they didn't make contingency plans for it. If they had known that Iran would systematically attack every single U.S. base in the region, they would have withdrawn their forces. They would have repositioned their equipment. Blah blah blah. They could have fallen back earlier, but they were forced to fall back after Iran had attacked and destroyed air bases, radar bases, the biggest, most important, the most powerful radar system in the world.
Why didn't they expect this? Why didn't they expect that Iran would attack their bases? Come on. Maybe some of the other attacks in the region, like to the Dubai airport or hotels, that or fuel tanks or whatever, that I could not have foreseen. But surely hitting back at the bases would just be the minimum for the Iranian.
It's really it's very strange. The shock. I think that I understand at least like how this mistake could happen. They really thought that the ballistic missile defense systems based on THAAD batteries would work. That even if the Iranians attacked with their missiles, as they surely would in the first 3 days before we got them, we would be able to survive that, just intercept all of this stuff, right? What they didn't reckon was that they would be able to get through their interceptors first, or that interceptors would run out faster than they assumed they would, or that they would be disabled. The fact that all the THAAD batteries in the region have been disabled is a massive setback, because it means that you are pushed back 500 miles, 600 miles, 1,000 miles, and so each sortie, instead of doing 3 sorties a day or 30 sorties a day from a single base, you can only do 5, right? Because it takes 5 times as long to come from here and go there. so the sortie rate has to fall. The rate at which you can interdict has sharply reduced. And that means that the interdiction war, the all-important interdiction war, is now even more daunting than it was before. So a number of... Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, I was about to say you can see this in the graphs of the number of attacks. And it's actually, funnily enough, the same size, same shaped graph, both for the Iranians and for American attacks. You see an extremely high rate of attack into the thousands. And then it drops off very, very sharply.
And then stabilizes.
So I guess, yeah, it stabilizes at a far lower rate, both for Iranian and American. And I would just add to that it seems symmetric, but it's actually not symmetric, because time is Iran's friend and America's enemy. Every single day that the Bay of Hormuz remains closed, every single day the American war machine is employed in the Middle East, I think that's a step closer to strategic defeat for the Americans, and thus a step closer to strategic victory for the Iranians. I want to move off the air war a little bit and address the boots on the ground theories, such as they are. And one of them is that we're going to get the Kurds to do our dirty work. What happened to that? I think that one's blown up already.
So this was an Israeli idea. The Israelis are longtime patrons of the Kurds since the early 90s at least, if not the 80s. And they wanted to push the Americans that it's possible to break up Iran and to kind of dismember it. And the way you would do that is that you would arm and fund the separatists in Baluchistan and Azeristan and Kurdistan in Iran. This theory, the theory was that this is another horizontal escalation, right? Like this is one way in which we can get at the regime and kind of like really harm it, and maybe we can cause state collapse in that way. There was no possibility of that. At best, a Kurdish statelist could be carved out with US-Israeli air power and Kurdish ground forces. But this would be a tiny state up northwest in Iran. It was not going to change the equation about the interdiction war, about Iran's ability to keep Hormuz closed. It's not going to solve your military problem for you. So that was clear even if it had succeeded. But the Kurds said no. The Kurds said we are not interested.
Well, I can imagine because they just got played in Syria. So why would they say yes? What changed?
The Kurds have a very serious problem, right? It's not just that, it's hard for the United States and Israel to protect them from the air permanently. Iran is right there and it's never going anywhere, and it is going to come back for them. But the other major problem is that the Turks will also come for them. Like they're going to be squeezed between two massive land powers that the Iranians and the Israelis and the Americans can't really fully help them out with, as they found out when Turkey invaded Syria and imposed their, carved out this whole zone, creating a buffer between Turkey and the Kurdish ruled region in northern Syria. I wrote one piece recently, which was that the Kurdish Stratagem is a recipe for Israeli-Turkish war, because this is a existential threat to Turkey.
Yeah, I want to take just a tiny tangent here because even as Israel and America have their hands full with Iran already, you've got former Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett going on shows and things talking about how Turkey is next after
Turkey is the new Iran.
I'm just like, boy, you're still in big trouble with Iran and you're already thinking about the next chunk you want to bite off?
It's not just
That's
Iran.
amazing.
It's not just Bennett. Naftali Bennett is a very important figure in Israeli politics. He's kind of like closer to the center than Bibi actually, and he's like he has a lot of sway. But not only that, like if Bennett is saying this, it's very serious, right? Because that means that the bulk of political opinion in elite Israeli circles thinks this way, and so when they're saying, and not just Bennett, other people have also said this, that Turkey has become a real threat to Israel. It has tried to extend its influence into Syria. It has tried to extend its influence into Gaza. It has tried to, basically their big contention is this Kurdish question, right? So as I said, the Israelis have patronized the Kurds for a very long time. They trained them, they provide intelligence to them, they've armed them. When the Americans step out, the Israelis are always there. They're not stepping out. So the Kurds can be seen as an Israeli proxy in a very serious sense. And this is a massive threat to Turkey. And so Turkey has been proactive in containing this threat in Syria. This they are portraying as an existential threat to Israel.
Okay, so my father actually spends a lot of time in Turkey. And when I told him this, he was just like, there's no way. Erdogan is strong. How very dare they? They get their fuel from Turkey. I mean, what are they doing?
I don't know.
Even if they
Turkey is
have
a
to
very,
stop
very strong and big power.
Huh?
Turkey is a very
What'd you
strong
say?
and big power that is very close to Israel. This is not a fight they want to have.
So what are they doing? Even if they're thinking of this in their heads, what are they doing?
This seems to be that the Israelis seem to be completely drunk on American power. So they've completely lost it. The Israelis are not thinking straight. So it's kind of like how like the neocons in 2003 wanted to go to Iran and then turn left into Syria or right into Iran, right? So
Yeah,
it's
real
that
men go to Tehran,
we want
right?
to take care of the whole region now. And like this idea that we will dominate everyone in this region is a recipe for catastrophe for the state of Israel. This is a very bad idea. The Israelis are not thinking straight. I think it's the American responsibility to knock some fucking sense into them. They are not thinking straight for their own national security. This idea that somehow Israel is going to dominate the Sunni Arab states, the Turks and the Iranians and everybody else, like that's not going to work. That's a recipe for massive and endless war and instability.
To me, they've made so much progress with the Abrahamic Accords. It seemed like they got a lot of Sunni Arab Gulf states on side with them. The Saudis, the UAE, all of those countries. And seems like they've thrown it all away with not just with attacking Iran and upsetting the regional balance, but with a lot of foolish talk of greater Israel, not just from the very right wing, but also from opposition figures. When I heard it, I was absolutely shocked. I checked online. I was like, is this guy a kook? And they're like, no, he's the leading opposition figure in Israel. And he's talking about how greater Israel is promised. And I just couldn't believe my ears.
Right. I mean, so something very, very serious has gone wrong in Israel since October 7th. It's not just that their risk appetite is much higher, that they're just much more aggressive. It's that their entire discourse has become trapped in a very escalatory sort of supremacist. Everybody's just like trying to outdo each other. How can we escalate more? How can we, be more hawkish than the other guy? It's a kind of race to the bottom and a sort of race to who can be more hawkish than the other guy. That seems to be what has happened in Israel, and it's very, very serious because the United States is now captured by Israel. So the Trump administration was not in this kind of business, right? There was no sign that they were going to do this. The Israelis seem to have really, really launched a major persuasion campaign to convince him that now is the time to gut Iran and to go after them and finish this business, right? But I think it's they have bitten off much more they can chew, and now there are going to be ramifications. One of the big shocks is to the Gulf oil monarchies, right? Which are like, you were mentioning the Abraham Accords. They were mostly theater. UAE and Saudi and so on were already aligned with the United States and Israel. When they signed these things, they were basically saying, we don't really care about the Palestinian question anymore. We can move on without it, right? So even the diplomatic posturing and the public pronouncements about Arab states supporting Palestine and trying to pressure Israel into some kind of accommodation of the Palestinian question, even that was abandoned under sort of the scheme emerged from the White House, the Biden White House, to basically mark a win for the Biden White House. This is Jake's idea. And the idea was that you normalize relations, you created this thing, you've secured Israeli security or whatever, and you brought Israel in from the cold, and you have normalized relations with Arab states or Muslim Arab states. But this was mostly theater, and certainly after October 7th, the entire idea. So Jake Sullivan, the previous national security advisor, he was quoted as saying, he wrote actually, not quoted, he wrote in Foreign Affairs, which is a kind of semi-official journal of the foreign policy community in America, where he said, the Middle East is now more quiet than it has been in a long time, right? And this is a great success, and we are building on that success, and we are creating this. And this was right before October 7th, 3 or 4 days before. So they're living in this fancy world that you can just bracket the Palestinian question, do whatever you want to it, genocide them the hell out, push them out into Jordan, whatever in the West Bank and so on, and they're basically taking over and annexing most of the West Bank. And so they are pursuing extremely unilateral, very aggressive policies, with respect to the Palestinians, and they will not accept any constraints on their actions. And so the Israelis have become an extremely radical force in the region, a very, very destabilizing force in the region, and it's freaking everybody out.
This surprised me because I always assumed that the Abrahamic Accords was more like Jared's jam, but
Yeah.
it's actually
No, no.
inherited from Jake Sullivan, of all people.
I mean, no, actually, this goes back to the first Trump administration. But what I'm trying to say is that it was brought to fruition under Biden. Um,
Okay, so
it's been going on for a
basically,
while, yeah.
what we're talking about is basically we appear to have two political parties in opposition, but in fact, they're carrying on each other's policies through these terms. We saw it with the chip wars, and so it is with the Abrahamic Accords. What started under Trump 1 was actually shepherded to fruition through Jake Sullivan during the Biden administration, and then Jared just picked it right back up again.
Yeah. So I mean,
So we,
this is like a partly a good cop bad cop routine, right? Like both parties in America have essentially been bought by the Israel lobby, and
Tweedledee and Tweedledum.
so I mean, there is a lot of opposition building to this. One of the great big developments of the BB's war since October 7th is that there's a lot of opposition among Democrats now towards this policy of just being unrestrained pro-Israel on every question. And this is really undermining the long-term relationship between the United States and Israel. And the Israelis also understand that this is happening, and they want to finish business while there's a still
Right.
while the,
They realize that for them too, it is use it or lose it. Because I think we've all seen the polls where not just Republican or Democrat, but American popular support for Israel versus the Palestinians did the death cross.
and this is not coming
Yeah.
back. This is just going in one direction.
I don't think so. I don't think it's coming back. It's just
It's a generational shift, and if you age stratify the thing, you can see that young people are overwhelmingly against this thing, and so every single year a new crop of voters is coming into the American political system that is not going to take this for very long, and so
okay. So we know that the next generation is not going to take it, but it seems like the Israel hold on this generation of American leaders, this Trump administration, might be the strongest and most insane I've seen in my lifetime, or maybe I've just been paying attention. But could it be crazy enough that we're actually talking about American ground troops in Iran in some capacity?
before we talk about ground troops, can I just step back to the point
Sure,
that you just
of
made
course.
about sort of this pro-Israeli sort of extreme moment? The bottom of this cycle was when the nuclear deal was signed um, uh, between the
JCPOA?
between the P5+1 and Iran, right? That was a massive achievement of the Obama administration. It could have kept a lid on the nuclear program for a very long time and brought in Iran and moderated its behavior and so on and so on. And it was an astounding success, but it was completely gutted by the Trump threw it out in the first term. That was the low point. At that point, Bibi came to the United States and campaigned against Obama in an actual election. People in the Obama administration were furious. There's a guy named Ben Rhodes. He was Obama's main speechwriter and a very important figure in the Obama administration. And he was called Ben Hamas Rhodes because he was so furious at this, election interference by a foreign sitting head of state. That was supposed to be the largest recipient of U.S. military aid and U.S. economic aid. And so he's like, what the hell? Who's the superpower here, right? And so there is a lot of, even among, non-radical, non-left, even just in a very mainstream Democrat circles, opposition to Israeli policies and U.S. policies regarding Israel is growing very, very, very strongly. And this is so they have a window. They have a sort of shrinking window, and that seems to be part of what is driving the Israeli escalation. And this particular this giant thing that they've bitten off now that's going to bring bring the whole house down on them.
Yeah, to me, I just don't see which way out because, like, we are talking about air campaigns not having a satisfactory route to victory. So we're talking about ground campaign. And when we talk about ground campaign, I think we can rule out any kind of Iraq-style takeover nation-building project because Iran is just so huge. It's twice the size of Ukraine, 93 million people. So people have been suggesting here and there all kinds of ways to do a limited strike of Iran. There's two schools that I can think of. The first is the Karg Island School, which is we go into Karg Island, we take Karg Island. This is where Iran exports its oil, and we hold Karg Island and we do something there. Another is we go in and we grab the uranium, we find out where the enriched uranium is, and we do a raid on the uranium to prevent them from making a nuclear bomb. I've even heard a third theory, it's so crazy that I just have to mention it, which is we airdrop paratroopers to Tehran airport and we turn it into an air bridge and we just spray and pray and do a bunch of distraction and destruction and then airlift our guys out. So each crazier than the other, I would say. But are we at the point of desperation where one of these could be put into action?
So remind me of the three Karg.
Karg Island, there's the grab the uranium, and the third is Tehran airport air bridge.
Okay, let's talk about Karg first. So Karg is where the Iranian oil is taken from pipes and put it into tankers.
Yes.
And the idea is that if you can take that, you've taken 40%, 50% of Iranian revenue, and you can put that pressure on the government that way. There's a huge military problem with this. The military problem is that Karg is not only exposed to the drones and missiles, it is exposed to Iranian artillery fire. It is exposed to Iranian sniper fire. This is a very, very difficult thing to survive.
It's right off the coast, right? That has to be in order to be infrastructure to export oil.
All these ideas that you just land the force there, whatever. How is that force be protected? The BMD systems don't work. The force will have to survive under constant pressure, constant fire. It will have to take a lot of casualties, and it will have to stay there and hold it. Like, this is a harebrained scheme. It's militarily not feasible until you have suppressed the firepower of the Iranians. And once you suppress the firepower of the Iranians, I agree, you can take it. And so it is something that one could think about a year from now when they have suppressed Iranian firepower successfully, maybe, or at least brought it down to a level where US troops can take the casualties. Right? But if you throw in a 82nd Airborne at Karg Island, you're going to get hundreds of casualties, dozens of fatalities. It's going to be a catastrophe. This is a really harebrained idea. No military general will sign up for this. The military has already refused multiple times that they're not going to escort the tankers for the same reason. The problem is the suppression of Iranian firepower. If you can't suppress the firepower and you just send a ship down there, what do you think is going to happen?
They've thrown chum into the Amazon River. It's not going to be pretty. Yeah, but people are seriously suggesting this, and I'm wondering though. Let's say
they're floating it because they're flailing around, and it's not going to be tried because militarily it makes no sense. You can't do it unless you suppress the Iranian fire.
What about the smash and grab of the Iranian enriched uranium? I think that's another thing that's floated around.
You're President Trump.
Quite official.
You're President Trump. I'm General King. Okay? You asked me, should we do this uranium thing, right? Should we send in...
Let's go grab the uranium.
Let's send in 100 special operators, the best of the JSOC. We've guys heavily armed, and they will go and occupy the site, and they will put detonators that will detonate specific uranium sites, disable of the uranium, blah, 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 right? So we're going to do
I need a win.
Captain America.
Give me a win.
Right, we get a win, we get a... You know. Okay. What happens if they come under fire? What happens if they come under missile fire? What happens if they come under artillery fire? What happens if we can't rescue them? Right? This is a very high risk proposition, Mr. President. What I would suggest is we drop another mother of all bombs. a bunker
Yeah.
buster bomb.
Yeah.
We drop
Yeah,
10
to
of them
do
this
it.
time. We can do that with zero casualties. That'll give us almost as good a chance of destroying this facility that you so want to destroy. The idea that you can land a brigade there or something is a completely harebrained scheme. This is not how it works.
Well, it really seems like everything that I could potentially accomplish with boots on the ground, I can do more easily from the air.
In terms of
And more often
destroying objects, yes.
in
But
terms of destroying objects. The only thing that the boots on the ground is irreplaceable for is actually holding the territory, but that we can't do anyhow because the territory is so vast. So whether it comes to
let me suggest in what ways the ground forces could become operative, right?
okay,
One is that the Iranians' ground forces move, in which case there is a massive threat to, let's say, to take over Kuwait. Right? Kuwait is 2 hours away from Basra. 2 hours drive from Basra. It took Saddam's army a day to take Kuwait. It would take the Iranians 2 days to take Kuwait. In such a scenario, we would have to airlift a massive ground force to hold the Iranians at bay. So that's a scenario where ground forces become absolutely unavoidable. You can't let Iran take Kuwait, and you have to stop them. There is no other way to stop them from the air. You have to send ground forces. You're kind of forced into it, right? That's one scenario in which ground forces could enter this conflict from the United States. The other is that they decide that, well, this problem must be solved once and for all because Iran has this stranglehold over the world economy and we can't live under that threat. So we must change the regime. That requires, I did the math. If you want the same, so the military talks in terms of, you were talking about nobody wants a counterinsurgency war, nobody wants a long-term occupation but you have to understand that you can't change the regime without occupation. You have to occupy the country. You have to install a new regime, make sure that it is stable, can survive on its own, and then you can leave, right? So that is absolutely guaranteed to result in a counterinsurgency war. At the minimum, you need to establish the authority of the new state that you're establishing. So that requires certain amounts of force to space ratios and certain amounts of force to population ratios. This many soldiers per 1,000 people, right? Those force to space ratios, if you take what was done in Iraq as a template, which was much lighter than what was done in Vietnam. If you take those force to space ratios, you would need 600,000 men, 1 million men in Iran.
wow,
Right.
1 million men.
Right. And so the lower bound on this is 600, 700,000. And so it's if you want to do this, it would have to take a massive insult to the United States. They would have to kill, 1,000 American servicemen or something and inflame the whole country before this is politically even vaguely within shouting distance of a possibility, right? So large-scale regime change can't be done without ground forces, and the commitment of ground forces that are required is so large, and the time commitment, the sort of window of this is so long, and the American appetite for landing a big American land army in the Middle East is so low that I just don't see it as a real possibility.
Okay, we've gone through the air war possibilities, we've gone through the boots on the ground possibilities, and it seems like everywhere we look there's a dead end. This is a war that never should have been started. I don't know how it was started. I don't know how it got okayed. Can you tell me what is likely to happen from this point on out? Because I don't see an easy way out for Trump either. A lot of people talk about tacoing, but a taco, like I said previously, it takes two to taco. Even with American withdrawal, you can't count on the Iranians to hold it right there. They might continue to bombard American bases in the area. They might continue to attack Israel. So what is the off-ramp for the world and for America, for Iran, and for Israel, which has slightly different interests?
Trump has already made it clear he wants to taco, right? Oil went over $100 per barrel for a few hours and he panicked and he said, no, this is going to be a short.
But what is it at now?
Almost
Didn't
done.
it go down?
Right.
Where's the oil now? It went up to almost 120, right? And then now it's like what?
Check right now. It is at $95 a barrel. It's climbing again.
That's already cheap. I thought
And this
it's
is
going to go up
after they've
again.
released the most massive release of strategic petroleum reserves in history.
Wow.
And so we are at 93 right now. People with the news, sort of the military crisis is filtering into the traders' heads, and this is going to reprice above 100 in no time, and might stay there for a very long time. Actually, and it might even climb much higher. The Iranians have made it clear they want it at 200. But let's talk about the problem of war termination. This is much more thorny and difficult than people are realizing, and the reason, even if Trump, wants to call it off, and he's like, "Oh, we've successfully completed combat operations. It has been a massive success, the greatest success in the history of all military operations, and so on," and like we can call it a day, right? What happens if they don't stop shooting? And there is a very good reason for the Iranians to not stop shooting. The reason is that if they let the Americans call it a day and walk home, then they have again failed to restore deterrence. They need to persuade the Americans that another attempt like this would be very costly. And the only way to do that at this stage is to impose great costs on the United States, is to make an example of this president, is to say the political cost on this president was so extreme that no future president will ever consider the idea that he should go in for a regime change and attack Iran and so on and so on. So and right now they know that they have the upper hand. They know that they can keep the pressure up, they can turn the knob up and keep it there for as long as it takes for this presidency to collapse, for as long as it takes for them to cry uncle, right? The Iranians hold a very, very dramatic strategic advantage here, because of the problem of the interdiction campaign that I'm talking about, because the time scale at which it can work. Even if it works, it's going to take many, many, many months, and that is going to destroy the world economy. It's going to cause a global recession. It's going to mean triple-digit oil prices for many quarters. This is going to be a massive shock that destroys this presidency and this thing. So what can the Americans offer then to induce and seduce the Iranians into ceasefire, right? This is a very difficult problem, because Iran's main problem, you have to understand, is how do we make sure that the Israelis and the Americans don't come back again in 6 months, 12 months, 30 months? What is the guarantee? Who on this whole planet can guarantee that the Americans and the Israelis won't come back again for more, right?
I would say the only thing they can do is just to destroy those bases so that the cost of just rebuilding becomes prohibitive.
No, but the bases themselves, change the rates and the timing. The United States is not reliant on their bases. It can still conduct a war on Iran without those bases. So the problem of getting attacked by Israel and the United States doesn't go away, even if the bases are gone.
Okay.
So you really actually have to persuade or have some kind of backup plan for what happens if you can do this. One possibility that I've floated, which I think is plausible, is that the United States says, okay, don't just tell anyone, we won't say we agreed to this, but get a resupply of weapons from Russia and China. Restock your arsenal, build back your missile arsenal, build back your drone arsenal. That is your guarantee that we won't attack again, because we understand this is extremely costly. You can do this, fine. We'll all step back from the brink. You'll get some kind of reassurance. That's a very, very difficult for them to eat. But this is actually something that they would accept. What is the alternative? I can't think of a single one. What alternative is there? Unless China guarantees an unlimited supply of drones and missiles and weapons to the Iranians, which if they did, that would be fine. The Iranians would be willing to fight the Americans and the Israelis for the foreseeable future if they were attacked. But
This is a game theory problem now, isn't it? We've gone away from a geopolitical problem into a game theory problem
it is.
of right now Iran has the advantage, but it cannot let up without securing a longer term advantage. And it's really, really hard for America to give the assurance, especially since they've already given their word twice before that they were negotiating, and it turned out to be a ruse. So they're not agreement capable. So I think this is something that is missed by the likes of Pete Hegseth. The reason to have some level of integrity. It's not for wokeness sake. It's so that you can
You'll
actually
believe when
talk
you
to
say
your
something.
opponent in a believable way. Okay, we gotta wrap this up, Anusar. And I have to say the I'm dismayed. I'm dismayed not just as an American, because it seems like American prestige, American power is taking a major bath. There's no getting around it. I'm dismayed as a citizen of the world, because it seems to me that the world cannot get around a serious economic depression. And by the way, it seems like people are not really responding to it in the financial markets at all. I don't know what's going on there. But I want to bring it back to China, because this is, first of all, this is a China Sinosphere focused podcast. And it seems like China has just been, to use a Chinese proverb, we've been looking at the fire burning across the river and just being like, oh, how terrible. But what has China been doing? What can China do? China surely does not want the world's economy to go up in flames, because there's no way it can avoid the conflagration. So, what are the options there?
I would recommend an article that somebody I correspond with often, Professor Dov Levin, wrote about this China question. And he argued that China is the big winner of this. And the reason is interesting. Multiple reasons. One is that the whole world now knows that relying on oil and gas from the Gulf and from the United States and so on is very, very geopolitically risky and a source of possible instability and insecurity. So one big thing that's going to happen is everybody's going to buy Chinese EVs and Chinese solar panels, and China's entire clean sector is going to see a massive demand the world over. And that's a big economic commercial win for China. And it kind of solves many of their problems of involution and like the hyper competition that's happening in this sector in China.
Saved by the bell for BYD.
Saved by the Americans yet again. The other thing that is happening is that the Chinese are observing American war fighting under these conditions, under conditions of mature precision strike between a power that can use advanced missiles, has a lot of the same capabilities that the Chinese and the Americans have. And they are looking at this and they are learning how the US military fights these campaigns, and they are taking notes, and this is going to help them. So that's another one. Of course, there is also like a diplomatic gain, unprecedented diplomatic gain. If the United States has thrown its weight behind Israeli aggression and is a source of massive instability in the world economy and in the international system, you really appreciate a big stable power that is not like flailing around and knocking its head into trash cans, right? It matters that it matters that the Chinese have their heads on their shoulders, and they are not doing crazy shit. And so I think that the diplomatic gains for China are very substantial here. The economic gains.
So you're underlining all the ways that China can just do nothing win. Do nothing win. It's what they've been doing for a while now.
Actually, one of the things that I
Is there
agree
something
with,
they can be doing affirmatively? What can they be doing?
I think
Help.
it's a mistake. I think that the Chinese should be more proactive because for multiple reasons. One is just a pure sort of balance of our game, where they understand that if Iran goes under, it removes a very large pole that was under in the corner, right? But that's just sort of like the basic balance part. The other is that at some point the Chinese are going to have to make the power felt. They just can't keep it in reserve forever. And this is one of the points where it would really be productive for the international system, where the Chinese say, no, this problem needs to be solved. Iranian security, not just Israeli security, has to be figured out. And we propose this, and we are prepared to back it up with our policy, right? And if they were to do that, that would be very, very productive. But I just don't see them doing it. And I don't quite understand the Chinese sort of fear here. What is it, do you think, they fear would happen if they were to airlift weapons to Iran?
If you got into an elevator with Xi Jinping and you had 35 seconds exactly to pitch him on something to do to help things go better, what would you say?
I think that it's time for other powers, including China, to step the fuck up. And I think that what part of what they can do is force the issue and say, no, we need to have a more stable, productive Gulf. This is in the global interest, and we will assert our power to deliver this global interest. We want stable relations. That means that Iran security has to be guaranteed. That means that Gulf security has to be guaranteed. That means that Israeli security has to be guaranteed. And you can't run around and blow things up. And I think, and they can use the rhetoric weapon. They can use the threat of supplying Iran. They have a lot of power, and they can deploy it if they wanted to. And I think they should.
Well, there you have it, folks. While I highly doubt that Chairman Xi is listening to this podcast right now, we do want to say it's time to do something, because the world that China wants to manifest is a world of order. And in a world of order, you can't be without the grown-ups. And right now, the lunatics are running the asylum. So please, China, step up. And thank you very much, Anusar, for joining us again. And
Thank you so much
I'm
for having
sure there'll be plenty to talk about soon again. So let's monitor the situation together.
me. Yes, sir.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you so much. Bye bye.